Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing my mid-season award predictions update. I made predictions for who would win each NHL award, or at least the main ones. And now that we are at the point where every single team has played at least 41 games, I felt like I should revisit that, make an updated prediction. Now we're at the mid-season point, as well as say who I feel as though on the Sharks would have the best chance at winning each award. So to start off is the Art Ross, and during the offseason I went with a very easy Connor McDavid choice. Now we're at the mid-season point and it's a bit less easy with how Kucherov has been playing so far, but compared to last season, Kucherov also had a great start and he ended up falling off. I feel like Kucherov might fall off again this season. McDavid never falls off, and as such I think it'll be close, but McDavid should be able to edge it out. And when it comes to who I think would come the closest for the Sharks, this category is more like, because I don't think Burns actually has much of a chance, but it's more like if I were to have gone into a coma today, and then I woke up June 24th, and then someone came up to me and said, a Sharks player won the Art Ross, the first player I would think of is my answer for each of these things. And so Brent Burns is who I think, just because he's got 7 more points than Couture, and I don't think Couture is going to be able to close that gap. And he's got 8 more points than Karlsson, and while Karlsson has been on fire, so has Burns. And so even if Karlsson closes the gap a bit, I don't think he can make up the 8 points. Next is the Hart Memorial, and during the offseason I predicted Calgary Flames Johnny Gaudreau. Now we're at the midseason point, I feel even stronger about that prediction. I thought the Flames would sneak into the playoffs and Gaudreau would be the main reason. They're now top of the division, and of course players like Giordano, players like Lindholm have helped certainly, but I still think Gaudreau will be able to take the Hart Memorial. And for the Sharks, I have to go with Brent Burns again. I think the start of the season that was talked about a lot with Erik Karlsson, it's my similar reason for why I didn't pick him for the James Norris. It's going to hurt him a bit, that start of the season that was somewhat struggled and was talked about a lot. Meanwhile, Brent Burns, you know, his defensive lapses aren't really as apparent to many non-Sharks fans, and especially a lot of these mainstream hockey writers. And I think just the points that Burns is able to put up and just the way he's able to play on the ice offensively would be able to carry him. But again, I don't think he's actually close to the Hart Memorial, just like he wasn't for the Art Ross. With the Norris, however, I would say he would come a bit closer. At the start of the season, I predicted Drew Doughty, and of course that ended up being extremely off with how the Kings have performed this season. So my new vote is to Mark Giordano of the Calgary Flames. You know, the Norris really has a couple of main categories. It's points. If you put up a ton of points, you're increasing your chances a ton. It's ice time, which is actually a big thing for a lot of these voters because they want to see that they are the number one guy on the team, and as well as stats like plus minus, which Giordano has nailed all of the categories. He's got 40 points, so it's not Brent Burns' 49, but still solid. He has a plus about a million. At this point, I think he leads the league with plus 30, so it's certainly impressive. And he plays a ton of minutes, like 25 every night, basically. And I think what also helps him a lot, besides the fact that he's been talked about a lot in the media thus far this season, is that he's 35. And so a lot of these voters will have a soft spot for a player who's managing to do all this at the age of 35. So I do think it's Giordano's to lose. I'd say Brent Burns really only has a chance if he can have some sort of insane offensive season and finishes the season with something like 80 to even 85 points. Erik Karlsson, if he breaks the the assist streak that he's currently on of like the appearances in games or whatever, he could also have an outside chance, and I do think Burns would have it a bit more. I see a lot of people bring up the reasoning why one of these players can't win it is because they're on the same team. So how can you say Burns is better when Erik Karlsson is right there? But I mean, the Nashville Predators have both Subban and Josi, and they're pretty constantly near the top. I mean, just last year, Subban was 3rd. I think Josi was 7th in Norris voting. So I don't think it disqualifies either Brent Burns or Erik Karlsson from winning. Next is the Calder, and the Sharks really don't have much going here. My prediction in the offseason was Elias Pettersson. My prediction currently is also Pettersson. It's a bit choppy at the point just because of his 2 injuries this season. If he actually only ends up playing something like 60 games on the year, I'm not sure if they'll be able to give him the Calder. It might go to someone like Heiskanen, but I still think Pettersson at this point will take it. And for the Sharks, it really comes down to just Shemek and Suomela, and Suomela hasn't played a game in a long time, and Shemek has been very good in the games he has played recently, and as such, Shemek seems like the main choice, but again, very far from actually being able to take it. Next is the Vezina, And my original offseason prediction was Vasilevsky, and my current prediction was very tough to come up with because I'm thinking Vasilevsky, but he's been injured. I'm thinking Pecorine, but I'm not sure if he'd be able to get it twice in a row. I'm thinking Gibson, but his team might miss the playoffs. I'm thinking Anderson, but now he's being injured, and I'm not sure if he has it. And so I decided to settle on Marc-Andre Fleury with how the Golden Knights are playing as of late, and he's played the most games in the entire league, which they value a lot. He has the most shutouts, which they value a lot. And so he'll probably end up even with the most wins by the end of the season, which they, of course, also value a lot, and his stats are relatively solid, so I think they're going to give it to Fleury. It would also be his first Vezina, if I'm not mistaken, so I think Fleury has a very good chance at it. For the Sharks, the only real opportunity is Martin Jones. I don't think Jones has any shot at it. It would take some sort of miraculous second half in which he's able to get, like, in like let's say he plays 30 games, get like 6 shutouts, get like an insane save percentage that will bring him up to something like 920 or plus, get an insane goals against average that can bring him up to 2.4 maybe, or bring him down to 2.4. But even then, I think this terrible first half, statistically at least, would make it so that he won't be able to get anywhere near the Vezina top 3 even. Next is the Rocket Richard, most goals in the league. I had Austin Matthews, and that was looking like a good prediction until, of course, he got injured. So now I'm just going with a much safer Alex Ovechkin. He currently leads the league by at least a couple of goals, and I think he'll be able to finish at that point. I do believe he's the best goal scorer of all time, and I don't even think that's too controversial to say anymore. And so he should be able to get, I think this would be his 7th Rocket. My Sharks prediction has to be Joe Pavelski. He's 7 goals ahead of the closest person, which is Meyer, who's been on a big cold streak as of late when it comes to goal scoring. The only real main threats to Pavelski's goal scoring lead on the Sharks would be Couture, Kane, and Meyer, and they're all at the minimum 7 goals away, as I said with Meyer. So even if Pavelski doesn't hit projected totals of like 40 to 45 goals and he only hits to something like 35, I still think there will be no Sharks that manage to pass him in that regard. Pavelski doesn't have much of a chance at the Rocket Richard, but it could technically happen. I'd give him at least a better chance than someone like Martin Jones to get the Vezina. Next is the Lady Byng, and this is a weird trophy because this is one of the main ones that I don't think you're disqualified from if you miss the playoffs. I think this is sort of separate from that. It basically just comes down to who's able to put up the most points while also not getting a lot of penalty minutes. I thought it would be Gaudreau, but he already has 10 this season. That doesn't technically disqualify him just yet. William Karlsson won the Lady Byng last season, I think, with 12. But, if he's on pace to get around 20 penalty minutes, and if he puts that up, I'm not sure if he'll be able to get it. So I'm giving it to Barkov, even if his team doesn't make the playoffs, just because he only, at the moment, has 2 penalty minutes, and he draws a bunch of penalties, and, he's seen as sort of a gentlemanly player. So I think he'll be able to get it. Logan Couture, actually, is rather close to the Lady Byng. He only has 6 penalty minutes this season. If he manages to keep it at around 6, maybe 8 penalty minutes, and he gets to something like 70-ish points on the year, he could have a decent chance of at least being nominated for this trophy, especially if Barkov maybe jumps up to 4 or 6 penalty minutes and his team misses the playoffs, which could only hurt him, even if I still think he'd be able to win it. And, players like Sean Monahan, I believe, also has 6 penalty minutes if he goes up to over 10. I think Couture could easily get a nomination. Can he win it? It's possible, but I'm not sure if it would be most likely, which is why I predicted Barkov. Next is the Selke, which is, of course, the most defensive forward in the league. And there's normally just an elite group of players that consistently get nominated, the Kopitar, Bergeron, everything like that. But this is an interesting year because a lot of those players are struggling and or injured. So in the case of Bergeron, who I predicted to originally win it, he has been injured for a decent chunk of this season, so that will hurt his chances. And then players like Kopitar missing the playoffs, or looking to miss the playoffs at least, or on pace to miss the playoffs. Players like Couturier are going to miss it. Barkov is probably going to miss it. It's possible someone like Mikko Koivu also misses the playoffs. Ryan O'Reilly could miss. And so the Selke is actually more wide open this year than it has been in many of the past years. And so my choice for it is Braden Point. I believe he was already a top 10 Selke vote last season. Now this season he's putting up even more points. He's even more relied on to be you could say he's a number 1 center on that team. Stamkos, you could say, is right behind him at number 2, since Point does play with Kucherov, and they're the sort of the main guys. But I would give it the point in this regard. Couture, I also think, is rather close. He could easily be a top 3 candidate. Again, if he can get up to 70 points, 75-ish points on the season, he's regarded to be one of the better defensive centers in the NHL. And with a lot of those other players falling off, Couture getting something like 3rd or maybe 4th most votes is very possible. I don't think he can get it over someone like Braden Point, especially since the Selke isn't really quantifiable besides, I guess, by points. I mean, you could look at things like takeaways and I guess face-offs, but it's not really an easy stat to see from just base stats. I guess if you look into advanced stats, you can get it, but rarely do the hockey writers, the guys who vote for the trophy, do that. And so I think Couture can definitely be up there. I just don't think he actually is a favorite. Next is the Adams, and this is for Coach of the Year, of course. During the offseason, I thought it would be John Cooper because he would have a historic season with the Lightning. I still think it'll be Cooper. I think it could come close if Cooper doesn't really finish off very strong with the Lightning and they get something like 57 wins to 58 wins. I think it could actually go to Bill Peters of Calgary because his team has performed a lot better since the previous season, which I'm sure a lot of the voters will like. But I think if Cooper can get to a 57, 58, maybe even 60 win season on the year, he should be able to get it. And so I will keep him as my main prediction. For the Sharks, of course, it has to be DeBoer, the only head coach at the moment for the Sharks. He's not going to get fired at this point. And I don't think DeBoer has much of a chance at it. I just think that Cooper, I think that Peters are probably just too big of candidates to even... for DeBoer to pass, especially with how DeBoer, how the fans' reaction to him were during the first, couple of months. Even some of the media began to jump on if maybe something should happen to him. Didn't end up happening, and it ended up being the right choice in the end, or at least it seems like it's being the right choice in the end. But I don't think he has much of a chance at the Adams. Next is GM of the Year, and during the offseason, or I guess I should say finally is GM of the Year, and during the offseason, I thought it would be Kyle Dubas just because he made that big signing for John Tavares, and I think I also made that prediction prior to the Sharks getting Erik Karlsson. I'm not 100% sure about that, but my prediction now at the midseason point is Doug Wilson. So I'm going to predict that a Sharks, not player, but Sharks associated person will win one of the major awards just because, he traded for Erik Karlsson, what was actually a pretty favorable trade for the Sharks. It didn't completely destroy, let's say, their core or their rookies, right? They gave up a couple of good prospects and a couple of picks, but it wasn't like a terrible trade in terms of assets, and Karlsson has obviously been fantastic for the Sharks for the majority of the season. He's managed to sign Lukas Radil, who's been solid. He signed multiple extensions to Hurdle and Couture. He managed to sign Evander Kane. He made some great cap moves in which he was able to get Hoffman and then immediately trade him to free up Bodker's $4 million. And so Wilson pulled a lot of moves. And when you compare it to Dubas of the Toronto Maple Leafs, his main move was basically just, signing a check for John Tavares, a player who sleeps in Maple Leaf pajamas when he was a kid and probably still does, 50% chance that he still does that. Not to say Dubas doesn't deserve any credit for that, but that was really his major move and one of his only moves at this point. His other ones are, I guess, signing Nylander at the last possible day, and Nylander hasn't done so well this season thus far, and miniature signings like getting Ozhiganov, a bottom pairing defenseman out of the KHL. So I think Doug Wilson is the main guy. I would say Dubas might not even be second place. I would say that it would probably be the Flames GM, Treliving, I believe is his name. He would probably be the next candidate just because of the Elias Lindholm train really worked out. But I think the James Neal signing that has not worked out will hurt him. And so I think Wilson could actually be in line to at least get a nomination. I'd say that's almost guaranteed at this point. But to also be able to get the victory and the award. And the Sharks, besides Brent Burns and Norris, in 16-17, I think their most recent individual trophy that they won was in 05-06 with Thornton's, Art Ross, and Hart Memorial. Correct me if I'm wrong about that. I know Couture came really close to the Calder, but he didn't actually end up getting it. But besides the Norris, as I said, they haven't won one in 12, 13 years. And so I think this season they can come close to the Norris, the Lady Byng, and the Selke, and I think they have a very, very good chance at the GM of the Year. Class dismissed.